Okay, well, here's an interesting game. This is one of those games where a guy makes an oversight and you have to cash in the victory, another game in 3 minutes. So his mistake, he's supposed to have played knight to c3, not knight to f3. So he's just going to let me take the pawn. Okay. This is a no-brainer for me. Solid stuff. I don't... Bishop takes f6. Not a good move, really. He moves out there to chop it down, and I just replaced it with another one just like him. Okay, so in the future, you really don't want to do that unless you have a specific purpose to chop the guy that you're chopping if it's going to be replaced by another knight. So he basically blundered a pawn and has almost nothing to show for it. Black has no weaknesses. So he's got 2 tempi of development, but he's got no weaknesses at all to attack. So that's a real problem for white. Black continues with the standard safe business. h3, very slow. Not highly recommended. Although I guarantee you I was going to play bishop g4 and chop that knight off, because every piece you trade off when you're ahead brings you closer to victory, conceptually. So missing his black squared bishop, his ability to attack the king side is going to be very difficult. So queen to d2, yeah, well, good luck with that. Hey, he's decided that, you know, he needs to go all out for the attack, and I'm like, okay. g4 is a reasonable move. Me, I'm going to meet his wing attack of g4 with a central counterattack e5. It's a classic chess lesson. If your opponent attacks in the wing and you can counterattack in the center counterattack is usually more valuable unless special circumstances come up. So there aren't any special circumstances in favor of white here. He's got a very weak attack. And that king to d1 is like, dude, you should have just castled long. Maybe he was going to. Maybe he just accidentally hit the thing wrong. e5, counterattack in the center, just as advertised. Oh look, he's pinning me. Oh look, I'm gonna increase my defense of e5. Bishop, knight, pawn, and queen. That's 4 defenders of e5. Good luck, Charlie. So he takes it. Hey, I take with the knight. Frees up my white squared bishop. And that's another piece that's gone. I'm going to take either his knight or his bishop. I don't really care. So he goes there. Knight to d4. Pretty good move, actually. He's threatening to play f4. So I got to get my knight out of the way, or my queen out of the way, whatever. Not the queen has to move, sorry. Or block it. f4 as advertised. Thank you very much. Chop suey. Got to move it or lose it, as the saying goes. Now the question is, where does the queen belong? I think you should look at this and pause the video. And we're back. All right. Hopefully you saw that queen to e7 is going to lose that bishop. He's going to press forward with f5. He's got 1, 2, 3 guys defending f5. The g-pawn, the knight, and the queen. And I only have 2, things attacking that, so that's not good. So that queen cannot stay on the e file. Queen d7 also loses because the bishop is trapped. He's got no retreat squares. So the best way to guard f5 and get the queen out of the way is queen to c8. If you draw a line along the diagonal from f5 to c8, you'll see that's the line where the queen belongs, but since d7 loses the bishop, we go to c8. But first, we chop off the knight. This is going to weaken his attack. Oh boy. This guy's a freak. f5. I'm not afraid of your f5. Bishop chops another knight. You can have the bishop. I couldn't care less. I'm not worried about the bishop. I'm just trying to break the attack because I'm going to be a couple pawns ahead. Now I go to d7 because it doesn't matter. He's got to take it. So count him. He's got 5 pawns. 2 doubled c pawns count as 1. So it's like he has 4 pawns, effectively. From a mobility standpoint, he's got 4 pawns. From a defensive standpoint, he could have 5. So it's a 4 or 5 depending on what's happening. So the double pawns will help him control squares down the side of the D and the B files. But those are blocked from the black side, so those don't help him. They're also not a weakness because my 5 pawn wide wall has a hard time getting to those pawns. So you know, they're weakish, but not horribly bad. There's no way to get in front of those pawns really. The key squares to exploit those would be c4 or a4, and those really aren't going to be exploitable by black in a meaningful way. The most meaningful exploitation black can use is to just cache the 5 versus 3 majority and use that F file to advantage. So I'm not worried about the C pawns or the A pawns. The kingside pawns are roughly evenly spaced and whatever. They're not going to be a problem. So anyway, you got to look to win the game. You have to look at what you have and what you need to do. So I have perfectly defended queenside pawns and center pawns. I need to get my rooks up there on doubling on the F file, and he's in major league trouble when that occurs because the 2-pawn advantage is huge. King to d2. You know, see, this king would be weak if you can get to it. When I can only get to it with a rook, and I really can't checkmate him or exploit his vulnerability, except for doubling of the rooks, which is cool, and that's what I did. It's the basic stuff. This is what you need to do. The general rules of chess are called general rules because they apply most of the time. Get the rooks on the 7th rank of the on the opposite side of the board. So I went rook to f2. That's where it needs to go anyway to attack the base of the pawns in general. He defended, and I came and put another one. Yeah, you want to take my rook? I'll pull another one just like it right there. Now I'm going to triple on that file if he lets me. Or even better, I'll play QG2 and just pound his pieces, trade them off, and win the king and pawn inning. So, woohoo, you got a threat on my e-pawn. What do you want, a medal? He's also double attacking my rook. So I don't have to trade it, but I have to deal with that e-pawn. So I can't defend the e-pawn and defend the rook. I could do one or the other. I could do one of those with check. So that pretty much explains what I need to do. Now we play e5, and that just completely blunts his doubled pieces on the e file. That queen and rook battery is worthless. He's never going to get anywhere that matters. He's staring conversely at the what do you call it? At the prospect of rook to f3, which, you know, is hitting c3. So he's got, you know, bad stuff looking his way. He really he could play rook f2. That would have been a better move than what he did. Me, I'm just getting all my pawns defended. I don't want him playing queen takes a7 and muddying up the water. I like it's all nice and clean. So I'm good with that. Man, again, rook f2 might have been better. A queens and pawns endgame would have been much harder to win. Even though I'm 2 pawns up. My king would have to go to the right, to the queen side of the board, go on the opposite side of the board, hide behind the pawns, and then I would be able to do something with my pawn majority in the center. That passed pawn, that e-pawn's a killer. But you gotta get safety for your king, and the queens are just notoriously check, diagonal check, you know, all that kind of stuff. So rook f2 for him might have been the way to go. Told you rook f3 was coming. I do not know. That doesn't even threaten anything. He's not threatening my b pawn. He's not threatening to do anything. You know, it's just a real curiosity. I'm like, hey, you know, I'm going to put all these pawns to where I can put them on a black tree and just, you know, guard c7. That's what I'm looking to do. There's no reason to go running around. I'm 2 pawns ahead. I don't need to go chase down the h-pawn and open another, because I'll have to move that rook off of that file eventually, and then it opens up another potential avenue for him. So I have 2 pawns. That's enough to win. I don't care about, I don't need 3. The difference between a 3-pawn majority advantage and a 2-pawn advantage is next to nothing. In a queen ending. In a rook ending is another story. But with the queen, it's that eliminating the queen's harassment is the primary goal. So you got to know what you have to avoid to win. And I've got to avoid stupidity. I don't want to give him chances by taking 1 or 2 more pawns, blah, blah, whatever. Now, h3 is not a good move because if you let me take the g-pawn, I will. Because the h-pawn is where the root of my pawn chain is located. It's safely hidden. So now I'm threatening a c-pawn and a g-pawn. I'm really going to take the c-pawn if I can. Yeah, good luck with that. See, he's got to worry about me trading queens. It's just bogus. Oh, when he trades it, that's even better. Whatever, dude, you're completely dead. At this point, there's nothing he could do. You could give him 10 grandmasters and they're not going to beat me. Black holds all the trump cards here. He cannot get in. The rook can only come into my field of pawns from the F or the H files, and my king at G7 guards both of those at the same time. He is screwed. He has literally nothing. Ooh, rook to F2. Ooh, big deal. I'll just take it. Ooh, rook to F6. You're not going anywhere because king G7, this guy rules the roost right there. You couldn't put that king on a better square if you wanted to. It's over at this point. He makes a mistake and goes to E6. So his rook has no escape. You lose. But it didn't matter. If he retreats to F2, I'm going to crush him. There's nothing he could do. There's literally nothing he could do. He could really retreat to F3 though. This would be a little better. What he did just loses. So he needs to go to F3, threatening to come in over here to C3. At least he can force some weaknesses in my pawns that won't be a problem, but at least it's something. You can't sit there doing nothing. You're just going to lose. The problem he has is that right off the bat, I would go rook to F4 because I'm nobody's fool. He's like, I'm coming after you. Now, I could play c5, which is fine, but that provokes weaknesses, and especially on this A pawn. But this solves all those problems. His king is shut off from this pawn. It's bad news for him, man. Everything's got. I told you way back I was going to guard this from the c7 square as the root of my pawn tree. He's in bad trouble. I can go king, over to the c file to defend that if I need to. Or I can just, press this forward here with king, rook, and pawn pressing against this. And if he defends this, if he overwhelmingly defends the G pawn, the problem he will also run into eventually is that I will mobilize the queenside pawns once the G pawn is close to queening, to where he's going to create another passed pawn on the queen side, and he will lose. It's just technical execution. He made a mistake which simplified the game by going to e6, and I trapped his rook. That was a horrible blunder that under time pressure and psychologically he was losing the entire game. It really gets hard to defend this scenario. He did a lot of things and tried a lot of stuff, but it's super difficult, and he ended up failing in a super difficult, after he made a bad move. It's like, well, not a big deal. But it wasn't just like he's not just some idiot for doing that. This is a culmination of a lot of pressure during the game. So, it was a good, solid game. He had a lot of good basic ideas of showing how someone's trying to recover from a mistake. And if you let them, he had a lot of threats on me that he could have won the game. The hallmark of a better player is that I see what he's going to be doing or should be doing, and I moved to stop it, and I stopped it, and I got him because I am a better player. And I'm using these games to show you guys how a better player does certain things, and it will help you seeing it in the future when you'll look back. Oh yeah, dude, I remember when something happened like this. I watched those games, and this is how you do it, because you get the sequential process of how it is being done, rather than just saying, here's some game, look at this, isn't this guy brilliant? And he is. But if they're not teaching you how to become brilliant, just watching brilliance alone doesn't do it. So hopefully you enjoyed this one. You guys know what to do. Talk to you later.